The first thing you need to understand is this. I didn't decide to tell this story. It started telling itself. I found the recorder in my locker 3 mornings ago, tucked behind my spare gloves like it had been placed there gently, carefully, like someone didn't want it to rattle, like someone didn't want anyone to notice. But I don't remember putting it there. I don't remember owning it. And when I pressed play, I heard my own voice already talking. Not real. Real. Not real. I'm recording over it now because I don't know what happens if I let it finish without me. If you're hearing this, you're already closer to it than you think. And before I go any further, do me one favor. Make sure you're subscribed. I'm not saying that like a YouTuber chasing numbers. I'm saying it because if something happens to me while this is uploading, I need people to notice. I need someone to ask why a railroad officer in Pennsylvania left behind a confession and then stopped responding to calls. And tell me something in the comments too. Where are you watching from right now? City, state, country, even if you don't want to be specific. I just need to know how far away you are, because I keep getting this feeling that distance doesn't matter the way it's supposed to anymore. Okay, listen. Railroad police work is the kind of job that makes you believe in patterns. Everything on the rails has a rhythm. Trains, signals, schedules, even trespassers. You see enough of them and you learn how they move, when they move, where they step. You learn what belongs and what doesn't. Most nights are quiet. So quiet you can hear the rails talking to each other when the temperature drops. So quiet you can hear your own breathing and know exactly how alone you are. And that's the thing about being alone around train tracks. It isn't like being alone anywhere else. Because the railroad is never truly empty. It remembers. Steel holds sound longer than it should. It carries vibration like a nerve. You can stand on a dead stretch of track and still feel something coming from miles away, something you can't see yet. And if you've worked it long enough, you start to feel when something is wrong. Not broken, not damaged, just wrong. Outside Scranton, Pennsylvania, there's an old tunnel cut through the hills that still sits on the line like a bad thought you can't get rid of. On paper, it's just a tunnel. Concrete lining, stone mouth, drainage grooves, a maintenance schedule that gets ignored until it can't be. But the men who work that area don't like talking about it. They'll talk about anything else. The weather, the shifts, the union, a derailed car 2 counties over. But not that tunnel. If you bring it up, they do this thing where they pretend they didn't hear you at first. Then they answer without looking at you, like they're afraid the tunnel might be listening through your mouth. I used to think it was superstition. I used to think it was just stories people tell to make long nights feel less empty. Until the night the tracks changed. Until the night dispatch sent me out for a routine signal irregularity and I found marks in the gravel that didn't belong to a train, didn't belong to boots, didn't belong to any animal I could name. Tracks. Parallel. Clean. Deliberate, like something heavy had been pulled slowly alongside the rail bed, without stumbling, without stopping, like it knew exactly where it was going. And when I followed them, I didn't do it because I was brave. I did it because I thought someone was out there. Lost. Injured. A trespasser in the wrong place at the wrong time. That's how it gets you. By making you feel responsible. By making you feel like turning back would be the same as leaving someone to die. But when I got close to the tunnel mouth, I realized something else had already been there ahead of me. Something that didn't leave footprints. Something that left. Absence. The air around the entrance didn't move the way air should. It didn't drift or swirl. It just sat there, heavy and still, like it had thickened into something you could almost touch. And the sound. God, the sound. You know how your ears ring after silence? Like your body can't accept that nothing is happening? It was like that, but backwards. Like the tunnel was swallowing sound before it could reach me. I remember lifting my radio to call it in. I remember my thumb hovering over the button. And I remember thinking, don't be stupid. Don't go in there alone. There's a rule every railroad officer learns without being told. You don't enter old tunnels alone. Because if you slip, if you fall, if your light dies, if something collapses, nobody will find you until morning. Maybe not even then. There's too much earth above you. Too much dark. Too much room for a person to become a missing person report instead of a name. I knew that. I swear I did. Not real. Real. Not real. The radio crackled before I could speak. Not static. Not interference. A voice. Low. Close. Like it was coming from inside my own head, using the speaker as an excuse. It said, Unit 2. And then it paused. Like it was listening for me to respond. Like it didn't want to continue until it knew I was there. I didn't recognize the voice, but I recognized the tone. The tone people use when they want you to do something without thinking. The tone that makes your body move before your brain catches up. It said, stay on the line. I should have turned around then. I should have walked back to my car, locked the doors, called for backup, and waited at a safe distance like I'd been trained. But the tracks were right there in front of me. And they were fresh, and they were leading into that black mouth in the hillside like a trail of proof. I told myself it was just a trespasser. I told myself the radio was glitching. I told myself the tunnel was only a tunnel. Not real. Real. Not real. I took one step closer. The gravel shifted under my boot with a soft crunch. And from inside the tunnel, something shifted too. Not like a person moving, more like a room adjusting. Like the darkness had been holding its breath. And now, it was ready to exhale. The tunnel outside Scranton didn't look special in the way horror stories want things to look. No warning lights, no strange symbols carved into the stone, no obvious sign that something was wrong. It was just a cut through a hill, a concrete-lined mouth half swallowed by moss and age, and the suggestion of damp air rolling out like an old breath. I'd driven past it before, hundreds of times. In daylight, it was nothing. A place your eyes slid over on the way to somewhere else. At night, it was a different kind of nothing. My headlights didn't reach inside. They hit the entrance and stopped, like the beam had found the edge of the world and couldn't cross it. The darkness past the threshold wasn't deeper darkness. It was a flat absence, like someone had painted over what should have been there. I stepped closer, anyway, because standing still felt worse. That's something nobody tells you about fear. Sometimes, the worst part isn't what you see, it's what your mind fills in when you don't. The tracks I'd been following ran clean along the ballast beside the rail, just off the steel, cutting through the loose stones in a way that made my stomach tighten. They weren't random. They weren't the scuff marks of someone running, panicking, slipping. They were measured, as if whatever made them had moved at a steady pace, never hesitating, never changing direction, and there were no footprints around them. That was the part that made me crouch down with my flashlight and stare like the answer might appear if I stared hard enough. Railroad ballast is unforgiving. Loose stone, sharp edges, irregular chunks. It keeps things in place by refusing to be comfortable. You can tell a lot from it. You can see where someone stepped, where they dragged their feet, where they stopped and shifted their weight like they were thinking. But there was nothing, just those two parallel drag lines, smooth as if something heavy had been pulled along without bouncing or catching. I ran my glove over one of the grooves. The stone dust felt cold. Not just cold because it was night, but cold in a way that seemed held in place, like it hadn't warmed under the air all day. I straightened slowly and looked at the tunnel again. I had the sudden irrational thought that the tracks weren't leading into it. They were coming out of it. Not real, not real. My radio hissed softly at my shoulder, a background sound I usually forgot about. The kind of sound that fades into the body after enough years wearing it. Static like breathing. The presence of a voice you can call on when you need to not be alone. I lifted it. "Dispatch," I said. My voice came out steady. A little too steady. "Unit 2 on location. I'm at the tunnel cut. I've got..." The radio snapped. A sharp burst of interference that made me flinch. Then a voice slid through, low and close, as if the speaker was pressed against someone's mouth. "Stay on the line." My throat tightened. That wasn't dispatch. Dispatch doesn't talk like that. Dispatch is brisk, tired, bored, irritated. Dispatch is a person sitting in fluorescent light drinking something lukewarm and waiting for their shift to end. This voice sounded like it was smiling without lips. I tried again. "Dispatch. Confirm transmission." Silence. A thick one. Not the normal dead air between messages. This silence had shape. It sat in my ear like a hand. Then the same voice, slightly clearer, like it was getting more comfortable. "Unit 2. Stay on the line." There was something wrong with the way it said the unit number, like it had learned it from listening to people say it, but didn't fully understand what it meant. Like a child repeating a phrase they'd heard adults use in serious conversations. I swallowed and forced my eyes away from the tunnel. I scanned the tree line, the slope, the gravel shoulder where my car sat. I looked for anyone hiding, anyone playing games, any sign of equipment or a broken repeater or a maintenance crew testing a channel. Nothing. The woods were too still. No insects, no rustle. Even the leaves looked frozen in place, as if the night had been paused. I clipped the radio back to my vest and took a breath. The breath sounded too loud. It came back to me a second later. Faint. Distorted. Like something inside the tunnel had breathed with me. My flashlight beam shook slightly as I aimed it at the entrance again. The inside swallowed the light. The beam didn't spread. It didn't bounce. It just faded into black like it was being absorbed by fabric. And in that fading light, for just a moment, I saw something that made me step back, without thinking. A reflective stripe. High up. Far inside, a narrow band of pale shine, like the kind you see on a safety vest or a uniform patch when a light hits it just right. I felt relief first, a rush of it so sharp it made my knees weak. Someone was in there. A worker, a trespasser wearing something reflective. Maybe they'd gotten turned around in the dark. I raised my voice. "Hey," I called. "Railroad police, if you can hear me, come toward the light." My words didn't echo the way they should have. A tunnel should throw your voice back at you. It should make you sound bigger than you are. Make your words bounce around the concrete and come back as a ghost of themselves. But my voice didn't bounce. It dropped. It fell into the dark and didn't return. I waited. The reflective stripe didn't move. I called again. Louder, "Come out." Now. Still nothing. Then the radio hissed and clicked as if someone pressed the button with a finger that didn't know how much pressure to apply. And a voice came through that was quieter than a whisper, but unmistakable. My voice. Not exactly, not perfect, but close enough that my skin prickled. It said, "Come out." And then again, a half second later, "Come out. Now." My mouth went dry so fast it felt like my tongue was shrinking. I stood there staring into that black opening. my flashlight trembling in my hand, and I realized something that didn't belong in the world I understood. That wasn't an echo. An echo repeats your words the way sound repeats. Same shape, same timing, fading naturally. This voice repeated me like it was trying to remember what I'd said, like it was tasting the words, like it wanted to know how they felt in a mouth. Not real. Real. Not real. I forced myself to move. I didn't want to, but I did. My feet carried me forward, crunching ballast, step by step. My training was screaming at me to wait for backup, to keep distance, to control the scene, but there was a deeper instinct pushing back against that training. The instinct that says if someone is in danger and you don't act, you're the one who will have to live with it. And for a second, standing at the mouth of the tunnel, I thought I could still make this into something normal. A lost trespasser. A worker without clearance. A prank. A radio malfunction. Something explainable. Something that didn't require me to change the way I looked at the world. I crossed the threshold. The air inside hit me like stepping into a basement that had been sealed for years. Wet stone. Cold metal. A smell like pennies left in water. The temperature dropped fast enough that my breath turned visible in front of my face. The silence inside was heavier. Outside, even in the woods, there's always something. Distant traffic. Wind. An animal. Moving through brush. The far-off hum of power lines. Inside the tunnel, there was only my breathing. And under it, faintly, like a thread of sound you might not notice until you stopped moving. A low hum. Not a train. Not wind. Not water dripping. Something that felt like a vibration in my teeth. The tracks beside the rail continued into the dark, smooth grooves in the ballast that looked like a path. I followed them, because I couldn't not follow them. My flashlight beam cut ahead, and the concrete walls gleamed wet. Water ran in thin lines down the sides, gathering in shallow channels along the base. I stepped carefully, boots slipping slightly on damp stone. 10 feet in. 20. 30. The entrance behind me became a pale rectangle of night sky. I stopped and looked back. I could still see my car lights outside, a faint glow through trees. Still normal, still possible to turn around. I faced forward again. And somewhere deeper inside the tunnel, the reflective stripe shifted. Not moved like a person walking. Shifted like something hanging had been nudged. A slow sway. Left, right, left. Like a pendulum. My stomach tightened again because the motion didn't match any steps. I didn't hear anyone walking. I didn't hear gravel crunching. I didn't hear water splashing. Just the sway, barely visible when the light caught it. I moved forward again. The hum deepened. A little stronger now. It pressed against my ribs like the sensation of standing too close to a running engine. And then the radio clicked, not a burst of static this time. A clean, open channel. Someone was holding the button down. I lifted my hand to it and hesitated, because something about the sound made me think of an open mouth. A voice came through, calm and conversational. "Good," it said. "Good. You came." I froze. That wasn't my voice, but it wasn't dispatch either. It sounded like someone trying on a voice the way you try on a coat that isn't yours. The words were too smooth, too practiced, like they'd been repeated until they were correct. I didn't answer. I held my breath. The voice waited, and in the waiting there was patience. Not anger, not frustration. The patience of something that knows time belongs to it. Then, softly, as if amused, it said again, "Stay on the line. Not real. Real. Not real." I took another step, and my boot scraped a stone. The scrape echoed, but not from the walls, from behind me. I spun around so fast my shoulder clipped the tunnel wall. The light snapped back toward the entrance. For a heartbeat I expected to see someone there, blocking the way, standing between me and the outside. There was nothing, just the pale rectangle of night, smaller now because I'd gone deeper. I turned forward again, chest tight, and forced myself to keep walking. Because the reflective stripe was closer, and now I could see something under it. A shape, tall, narrow, standing in the center of the tunnel. The beam caught the outline of a uniform shirt. A badge glinting faintly, a silhouette so familiar my brain tried to fill in the details automatically. Another officer. Backup. Relief hit me so hard I almost laughed. I raised my arm and waved, my hand shaking. "Hey," I called. "You got here fast." The figure didn't wave back. It just stood there. Then, slowly, it lifted one arm. Not in a wave, in a gesture that wasn't quite right. The elbow bent too stiffly, as if the joint didn't remember how it was supposed to work. The hand pointed toward me, not accusing, not threatening, inviting, "Come closer." I swallowed and took a step. The figure took a step too. And that's when I realized the part that broke something in me. The movement and the sound didn't match. The figure's foot lifted, but I heard the step land behind me. A wet crunch on ballast, right behind my heels. My blood went cold in a way I can't explain. Because in that instant, I understood. I wasn't following it. It was following me. And whatever stood ahead in my flashlight beam wasn't walking. It was standing still while something unseen moved behind me, matching my rhythm, copying the pattern of my steps. I didn't turn around again. I didn't dare. Because I could feel it now. A presence close enough to make the hair on my neck lift. Close enough that my breath came out shaky, and the air behind me breathed with it. Not real. Real. Not real. I stood perfectly still. The kind of stillness that isn't a choice so much as a command your body gives itself when something inside you screams danger. My flashlight beam shook in my hand, but I kept it aimed forward because I didn't want to lose sight of the figure ahead, even if I didn't trust it. Even if every instinct I had was telling me that what I was looking at was only an imitation of something human. The tunnel held its breath with me. I could feel it. The air was thick and damp, but it wasn't moving. There was no draft the way there should have been. No pull toward the far end. Just the sensation that the space itself was waiting, as if it didn't want to disturb whatever was happening. The radio clicked once more. Not static. A soft opening sound. And that voice, that careful voice, came back through. "Don't stop." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I tried to tell myself it was someone messing with me. A trespasser with a scanner. A maintenance worker playing a sick joke. Anything that fit inside the world I knew, but nothing fit. Because the voice wasn't taunting. It wasn't laughing. It sounded instructional. Like it was guiding me through something I didn't understand the rules of. Not real. Real. Not real. I moved my tongue in my mouth trying to find moisture. My throat felt like sandpaper. I forced my voice out anyway. "Identify yourself." The words came out thin and strange, like my voice didn't belong in this place. The figure in front of me didn't react. But the radio did. The channel hissed, and then my own voice returned through it. Quieter than mine had been. Softer, like it was speaking from behind a wall. "Identify yourself." Then again, a second time. "Identify yourself." The second time the cadence was wrong, like it was trying to improve, like it wanted to sound more like me. My hands tightened around the flashlight until my knuckles hurt. I thought about backing up. I thought about turning around, walking out, pretending I'd found nothing, and leaving the tunnel to whatever lived in it. But the idea of turning my back on the unseen thing behind me made my stomach twist. Because I could still feel it. Not a touch, not contact. Just a closeness. Like someone leaning in. Like breath against the back of your neck without the warmth of a body. I took one step forward. The figure ahead didn't step. It remained fixed. And behind me that wet crunch echoed again, perfectly timed with my movement, like the tunnel itself had placed a foot down. The sound of it made something hot and sharp bloom at the base of my skull. That wasn't a person. No human being moves without shifting their weight, without fabric rustling, without the tiny noises that prove a living body occupies space. This thing made only the sound of the step. Only the part it knew I expected. Nothing else. I kept walking, slow and careful. 40 feet in. 50. The entrance behind me was smaller now, a pale stamp of night framed by concrete. The car lights were fainter. The world outside felt farther away than it should have. I focused on the tracks beside the rail to keep myself grounded. The drag marks continued, straight as a ruler. No wandering. No searching. Only purpose. And then, as I drew closer to the figure, the flashlight caught details my brain had refused to process at first. The uniform shirt wasn't quite right. The fabric looked wrong. Too smooth in some places, too stiff in others. Like it had been soaked and dried and hardened into a shape. The badge glinted, but it was flat, like a sticker. And the reflective stripe I'd seen earlier wasn't on a vest at all. It was on a strip of material that hung down from its shoulder like a torn banner, swaying slightly even though there was no wind. The face was still shadowed. My beam refused to illuminate it properly. Every time I tried to angle the light up, it seemed to slip away, catching the collar, the chest, the hands, but never the eyes, never the features. I stopped again, my boots scraping slightly on damp stone. The figure stopped too. Or maybe it never moved at all, and my mind was only pretending it had. The radio clicked. The voice spoke again. Closer. Not real. Real. Not real. I didn't want, but I found myself stepping forward anyway, like my body had remembered the tone and decided to obey. That's the worst kind of fear. The kind where you realize you're not fully in control of yourself. I took another step. And another. The hum in the air deepened until it felt like pressure in my teeth. Then, for the first time, the figure's head tilted. Just slightly. Like it was curious. Like it was studying me. And I saw something at its throat. A radio microphone clipped there. That was the moment I felt a flash of anger cut through the fear. Because if someone was wearing a uniform and carrying a radio, they were either an officer or they'd stolen one. And if they'd stolen one, this was no longer a weird signal issue. This was a serious situation. I raised my voice again, stronger this time, forcing command into it. Step forward into the light. Now. The figure did not step forward. But the sound behind me did. That wet crunch. Closer, right at my heels. And then something else. A soft scrape along the tunnel wall, like a hand dragging lightly over concrete. I fought the urge to spin around. I held myself in place and aimed my flashlight harder at the figure. My beam flickered once, just a brief stutter, and in that flicker I saw its face. I wish I hadn't. Not because it was monstrous. Not because it was deformed. Because it was almost right. It was like looking at a reflection that hadn't loaded fully yet. Skin stretched too smooth, like wax warmed by a hand. A mouth slightly too wide, and eyes that weren't eyes. Just the suggestion of sockets filled with a dark sheen, like wet stone. The face wasn't making an expression. It was waiting for me to give it one. My stomach turned. I took an involuntary step backward. The figure's head tilted again, sharper this time. And the radio voice changed. The careful tone dropped. It became something closer to impatience. Don't go. The words hit me harder than a threat would have. Because it wasn't saying don't go like a person trying to stop you. It was saying it like a rule. Like something that believed the tunnel belonged to it. And so did I, now that I'd stepped inside. My heartbeat was loud enough to hear. Too loud. I was suddenly aware that the tunnel could hear it too. The hum pressed into my ribs. Not real. Real, not real. I backed up another step, slowly, keeping my flashlight on the figure. Dispatch, I said into my radio, voice shaking now. I need another unit out here. Now. I have. The radio exploded into static so violent it made me jerk. Then silence. Dead silence. No hiss. No open channel. Nothing. I was cut off completely. I stared at the radio, thumb pressing the button again and again. No sound. No response. Just a dead brick on my chest. I looked back up at the figure and my blood went colder because I realized it hadn't moved closer, but it was bigger in my beam, as if the space between us had folded, as if the tunnel was shortening the distance. My feet moved without permission. I stumbled backward faster now, boots slipping on wet stone. The figure did something then. It lifted its hand and pointed past me, toward the entrance, toward the outside world I was backing toward. The gesture wasn't a threat. It was a reminder that it knew exactly where I was trying to go. My flashlight trembled so much the beam wobbled across the walls. For a second, the light caught something beside me on the tunnel floor that made my stomach lurch. A boot. Not mine. Old, black, worn down, lying half buried in ballast at the edge of the rail. Still laced. Still shaped like a foot should be inside it. But empty. I swallowed hard and forced myself not to stop. Because stopping felt like dying. I backed up faster. And the footsteps behind me matched me now. Not one for one, but closer. Like whatever was copying me was getting better at it. Like it was learning to move in my rhythm. Crunch, 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 each one closer. Then, just as I reached the point where the entrance should have been clearly visible, I realized something that made my legs lock. The entrance wasn't getting bigger. The rectangle of night wasn't opening up. It was staying the same size. No matter how many steps back I took, I wasn't getting closer to it. My stomach dropped. I turned my head slightly, enough to glance at it. The tunnel mouth was still far away. Farther than it should have been. As if the tunnel had lengthened behind me while I wasn't looking. As if the exit had been moved. Not real. Real. Not real. I stood there in the middle of the tunnel, chest heaving, and for the first time I understood that this place wasn't just dark. It was active. It was adjusting around me. It was deciding where I was allowed to stand. The figure ahead remained in my flashlight beam, still and patient. Behind me, the footsteps stopped. But the closeness didn't. I could feel the presence right at my back now. So close I thought if I leaned even an inch it would press into me. And then, softly, from behind my shoulder I heard a voice that didn't come through the radio. It came through the air. It was right beside my ear. And it sounded exactly like me. It whispered, "Stay on the line." My vision blurred, not from tears, but from the sudden, overwhelming certainty that something had stepped into my space and matched itself to my shape. I clenched my jaw and forced one thought through the panic. If the tunnel could stretch, if it could move the exit, then the only way out might not be behind me at all. It might be forward. Past the thing wearing the uniform. Past the imitation. Past whatever was learning my voice. And that was when I did the most desperate, stupid thing I've ever done in my life. I turned and ran deeper into the tunnel. Running inside a tunnel feels wrong in a way that's hard to explain unless you've done it. Every sound you make comes back at you. But not cleanly. It returns layered, delayed, stretched. Your own movement turns into something chasing you, something multiplying in the dark. Even if you know there's nobody behind you, your body reacts as if there is. Because the echo gives you footsteps you didn't earn. But this wasn't echo. This was something keeping pace without needing the walls to help it. I ran anyway. My boots struck wet stone and loose ballast, slipping, catching, sending small stones skittering into the dark. My flashlight beam jerked wildly, painting the tunnel walls in frantic sweeps of pale light. The hum inside the air thickened as I moved, as if motion excited it. Not real. Real. Not real. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I knew if I turned my head even for a second, I'd see something I couldn't carry. Instead, I focused on the tracks beside the rail bed, those smooth grooves that guided me forward like a trail of proof. They were still there, still clean, still purposeful. That thought should have comforted me. It didn't. It made my stomach twist. Because whatever made those marks had moved through here calmly. It hadn't panicked. It hadn't run. It had known the tunnel, and the tunnel had known it. My breath came in harsh pulls, loud in my own ears. And then, I heard it. Behind me. Breathing. Not the echo of mine. Another breath layered beneath, slightly out of time, like someone trying to match my rhythm and missing by half a second. I forced my legs to keep moving. The air grew colder the deeper I went, cold enough that my chest started to ache when I inhaled. Water dripped from somewhere overhead in slow, steady taps. Each drop hit concrete like a tiny clock ticking. A clock that felt like it belonged to someone else. After what felt like minutes, maybe longer, the tunnel began to change. Not in a dramatic way. In a subtle way that my mind resisted at first. Because the mind hates admitting that a place can shift around you. The walls looked older. The concrete lining grew rougher, pitted, stained with long black streaks like smoke that had seeped into the structure and never left. The floor became more uneven. The drainage channel along the side was clogged with silt and leaves, as if this part of the tunnel hadn't been touched in a long time. But the tunnel was still in use. It had to be. I'd seen train schedules. I'd driven this line. So why did it feel like I'd run into the past? Not real. Real. Not real. The thought came uninvited. What if you didn't run deeper into the tunnel? What if you ran deeper into the tunnel's memory? I slowed, boots sliding on wet stone, and forced myself to stop. My legs burned. My lungs felt like they'd been scraped raw. The flashlight beam steadied as my hands stopped shaking just enough for me to see. The drag marks beside the rails ended abruptly here. They stopped like something had been lifted off the ground. And near that end point, scattered in the ballast, were objects that didn't belong. A crumpled paper cup, a piece of brittle plastic that might have been part of a flashlight casing, a strip of reflective tape, torn, half-caked in dirt. I crouched down, ignoring the wetness soaking into my pant leg. The reflective tape caught my beam and shone back at me. The same kind of shine I'd seen deeper in the tunnel when I thought it was a safety vest. My stomach tightened. This wasn't random trash. It looked placed. Not arranged neatly. Not like someone had set up a message, but like the tunnel itself had collected pieces of people and left them here in the dirt. A soft click came from behind me. I froze. Not the radio. Not my gear. A click like a tongue against teeth, like someone practicing a sound. I held my breath. The tunnel held it with me. Then a voice, very close, came through the air again. Not the radio. Not echo. My voice. Stop running. The words were quiet, almost gentle. Like advice. Like concern. My skin went cold and tight at the same time, goose flesh rippling down my arms. I didn't turn around. I stared at the objects in the ballast and tried to ground myself in reality. There was a paper cup. There was reflective tape. There was damp stone. I was breathing. Not real. Real. Not real. Then I noticed the cup had writing on it. Not the brand. Not the printed logo. Handwriting. Dark marker. The letters were smeared from moisture, but still readable. Stay. I stared at it for too long, and the longer I stared, the more my eyes tried to fill in the rest of the word, even though it wasn't there. Stay on the line. My stomach dropped. I stood up too quickly and my head spun. The hum in the air seemed to press harder against my skull. I turned my flashlight beam forward again. The tunnel ahead disappeared into darkness as it always had. But now, there was something else. A second set of markings along the ground. Footprints. Bare. Not mine. Not boots. Not shoes. The prints were pale, as if the feet had been wet with something chalky, leaving a faint residue on the stone. They were spaced evenly, like someone walking calmly, but there was something wrong with them. Each footprint looked slightly different, like the same person couldn't decide what shape their foot should be. Some were longer, some were wider. A few showed too many toes, smudged in a way that suggested more than 5. I stared at them until my eyes started to water. Not real. Real. Not real. I lifted my gaze slowly, following the footprints deeper into the tunnel. The footprints led toward a darker patch ahead where my flashlight beam seemed to weaken. And in that darker patch, the tunnel ceiling dipped. Lower, as if the rock above had sagged over time, as if the tunnel had been wounded and healed wrong. That was where the old stories came from. Every railroad line has them. Little folklore scraps that get passed down in break rooms and maintenance sheds. Men telling stories because they've seen enough accidents to know the world isn't as stable as people want it to be. They said there were tunnels you didn't whistle in. They said there were tunnels you didn't speak in at all. They said if you heard your own voice coming back to you in the dark, you didn't answer. Because if you answered, something would learn you. I'd always rolled my eyes at that. I believed in rust, in gravity, in fatigue and failure. But I also believed in radios, in signals, in the way sound travels and fades, and none of that explained what was happening here. I took a careful step forward. The bare footprint nearest my boots smeared slightly, as if it was fresh, as if something had just placed it there moments ago and the residue hadn't dried. My throat tightened. I forced myself to keep moving. Every few steps, I stopped and listened. The tunnel was quiet except for water dripping and that low hum, like the faint vibration of an engine you couldn't see. My flashlight beam caught patches of graffiti on the wall, old layers of it overlapping like sediment. Names, dates, crude drawings. But then I saw something different, written higher up than the rest, where no casual trespasser would bother reaching. A phrase, repeated in different handwriting, some faint, some bold, some scratched into the concrete as if someone had used a nail. Don't listen back. I stood there, staring. The words looked older than the rest of the graffiti, as if they'd been written, painted over, written again, repainted, written again. As if no matter how many times someone tried to cover it, it returned. A chill crawled up my spine. Because, I remembered, I'd seen that phrase outside, near the entrance, earlier. But when I came back in daylight, it hadn't been there. Or I hadn't seen it. Or it hadn't existed yet. Not real. Real. Not real. My stomach twisted again. I continued walking, following the bare footprints, following the drag marks that had ended, following the uneasy feeling that I was being led somewhere. Then the tunnel opened into something that shouldn't have been there. A wider space. A chamber. Not large like a cavern, but wide enough that the walls pulled back slightly. the ceiling rising higher, the air feeling heavier. And in the center of that widened space, directly between the rails, something sat on the ground. My flashlight beam caught it and my heart lurched. A radio. A handheld unit like mine, black casing. Antenna. The same model our department carried. It lay on its side as if someone had dropped it and walked away. I stepped closer, slow, careful. The radio looked old, scratched, dirty. The battery clip was cracked. But it wasn't corroded like something that had been here for years. It looked like something that had been here for days, or hours, or minutes. I reached down, my fingers hovering over it, and then I saw the name taped to the back in faded label maker letters. It wasn't my name, but it was a name I recognized. A former officer. A guy who'd transferred out years ago. A man who'd quit suddenly and never said why. A man who'd been normal until he wasn't. I stared at that label until my stomach felt hollow. Then the radio in my hand, the one clipped to my vest, clicked. Without me touching it. The channel opened, and my own voice came through, clear as day. Not distorted. Not copied badly. Perfect, it said. Pick it up. I jerked my hand back like the radio on the ground was hot. The hum in the chamber deepened, pressing into my ribs, and the water dripping seemed to slow. The drops hanging in the air a fraction too long before falling. I stood there breathing hard, staring at the abandoned radio between the rails like it was bait. Because it was. And I understood, finally, what the tunnel wanted. It didn't want my body. It wanted my signal. It wanted my response. It wanted the part of me that answered when called. The part trained to stay on the line no matter what. Not real. Real. Not real. Behind me, in the darkness where the tunnel narrowed again, a footstep landed. Wet crunch. Closer than before. I didn't turn around. I stared at the radio on the ground and realized I had only two choices. Pick it up, or leave it. But leaving it meant walking past whatever was behind me. And picking it up meant I didn't know. I didn't know what it meant. And that was the worst part, because my job had always been about knowing. About rules. About procedure. About the comfort of steps you follow in order, so nothing surprises you. But inside this tunnel, the rules belonged to something else, and it was waiting for me to play by them. The signal light in the center of the chamber didn't flicker. It didn't pulse or stutter like a dying bulb. It held steady, calm, confident, as if the tunnel had always meant for it to be there. Waiting like a marker on a map only certain people could see. That light didn't belong to any system I knew. Not the railroads. Not the maintenance logs. Not dispatch. A wrong color, suspended between red and green, like permission that didn't want to call itself permission. I stood at the edge of the chamber breathing hard, flashlight beam shaking across raw stone and broken rails. My boots felt glued to the ground. Behind me, the tunnel I'd run through had gone quiet. Too quiet. The footsteps that had chased me had stopped at the threshold, as if whatever wore them understood this chamber was different territory. Not real. Real. Not real. I whispered it under my breath, barely audible. The abandoned radio in my hand crackled faintly in response, the softest imitation of agreement. The voice came again, low and sure. Good, it said. You're here. It didn't say who it was. It didn't need to. The tunnel spoke like it had ownership. I forced myself to step forward, one cautious boot at a time, eyes fixed on the signal post. The broken rails around it looked torn, twisted upward like ribs pulled out of a chest. Old wooden ties lay scattered, half buried in damp earth, and between them were more objects. At first they looked like debris, Then my flashlight caught their shapes and my stomach sank. A hard hat with a cracked brim. A set of keys on a ring, the kind maintenance workers carry. A flashlight with its lens smashed. A glove, still shaped like a hand, belonged inside. Pieces of people's working lives. Left behind in the dirt as if the tunnel had collected them and set them down gently. Not thrown away. Kept. I moved closer, compelled by the same instinct that had made me pick up the radio. The need to understand. The need to label. The need to turn chaos into evidence. But the closer I got, the more the chamber felt like a display. Not a storage space. A room of trophies. Not real. Real. Not real. My flashlight beam slid across the base of the signal post, and there, carved into the metal in shallow lines, were words. Not spray paint. Not marker. Scratched. Repeated so many times they overlapped, some letters worn smooth, some freshly. Stay on the line. I stared at it until my eyes burned. The phrase wasn't a warning anymore. It was a command. A ritual. A rule the tunnel wanted obeyed. The hum that had followed me through the tunnel wasn't as strong in here, but it still existed. A low vibration beneath everything. It felt like being inside a machine that hadn't started moving yet, but could at any moment. I shifted my weight. Gravel crunched softly. And the radio in my hand whispered, unprompted, "Stay." I jerked my gaze to it. The screen was still dark. No power. But it spoke anyway. I tightened my grip until the plastic creaked. Then, above me, from the dark ceiling, something dripped. Not water. It sounded thicker. A heavier drop hitting stone. My flashlight snapped upward, beam searching the height of the chamber. The ceiling disappeared into shadow. I couldn't see where the drop had come from. I couldn't see anything except rock and darkness, but I could feel a presence up there, vast and patient. Like the tunnel had lifted itself into the ceiling and was looking down. Not real. Real, not real. I swallowed hard and forced my eyes back to ground level. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen at first. A shape beyond the signal post. A darker patch against the rock wall opposite me. At first, I thought it was another tunnel opening. But it didn't look like a tunnel mouth. It looked narrower, like a slit, like a seam in stone. And in front of that seam, standing perfectly still, was the figure in the uniform again. The one I'd seen earlier, the imitation officer. Except now, with the signal light behind it, I could see it more clearly. The uniform wasn't worn properly. The shirt didn't sit right on its shoulders, as if the body underneath wasn't built for it. The sleeves were a fraction too long. The collar looked stiff and flat like paper. The badge on its chest reflected my flashlight beam, but when it flashed, it looked blank. No name, no number, a badge without identity. Its head tilted slowly, like it was curious again. Like it was waiting for me to speak first. I wanted to run. Every part of me screamed to run. But the tunnel behind me felt sealed by something I couldn't see. Not a physical wall. A certainty. The kind that settles into your muscles when you realize there is nowhere to go that isn't already accounted for. The voice came again. Closer now. Not through radio or air. It felt like it came from inside my ribs. You stayed. The words weren't praise. They were confirmation. Like a box being checked, I forced myself to speak, because silence felt like surrender. What is this? My voice came out rough, thin, small in the chamber. Who are you? The imitation officer did not answer, but my own words returned, not as echo, as repetition. The abandoned radio whispered, "Who are you?" The signal light in the center of the chamber seemed to brighten slightly at the same time, as if it enjoyed the sound of the question. I realized then what the tunnel wanted. It wanted conversation, not because it cared, because conversation created connection. A line, a channel, a thread. It wanted me on it. Not real, not real. I took a step backward. The imitation officer took a step forward. And for the first time, the movement and the sound matched. Boots struck stone, real boots, real weight. My stomach dropped through my body. It had improved. It had learned enough to make the sound fit the motion. The figure raised its radio mic, the one clipped wrong to its collar. It pressed the button slowly, deliberately, as if it had learned how. And my own voice came out of its mouth, calm and steady, as if reading from a script. Unit 2, it said. Report status. I stood there shaking, flashlight beam locked on its face. The face was closer now. The smooth, waxy skin, the mouth too wide but closed. The eyes like wet stone reflecting faint light. It was wearing my voice like a uniform. Not real. Real. Not real. Something in my mind buckled. Because the voice wasn't just similar. It wasn't just an imitation. It sounded like me on a clear radio channel, the way I sounded when I was calm and trained and in control. The version of me that existed at work. The version that knew procedure and responded automatically. I opened my mouth to answer. And for a second, I didn't know what I was about to say. I didn't know if my words would come from me, or from whatever had already learned them. I swallowed hard and forced myself to say nothing. Silence. The chamber seemed to stiffen, like a room going tense. The imitation officer tilted its head again. Then the voice shifted. Not mine. The careful, guiding voice. The voice that had first told me stay on the line. It came from everywhere at once. You're trained to answer. My skin crawled. The voice continued, gentle as instruction. You answer the call. I felt my throat tighten. I thought of every night I'd sat with my radio clipped to my vest, listening to dispatch, listening to calls come in, responding without hesitation. Answer. Confirm. Proceed. I'd built my whole working identity on being reachable, on staying connected, on staying on the line. Not real. Real. Not real. The signal light brightened again slightly, like it was listening too. The imitation officer took another step closer. Its boots sounded perfect now. It stopped a few feet away, close enough that my flashlight beam fully lit its chest and shoulders. The uniform fabric looked wrong up close, like it wasn't cloth at all but something that only resembled cloth. It smelled faintly of damp earth. It lifted its hand slowly, palm open, reaching toward me. Not grabbing, offering, like it wanted me to place something in its hand. The abandoned radio in my grip suddenly crackled louder, the static sharpening into a whisper. Give. My heart slammed in my chest. Give it the radio. Give it the badge. Give it the words. Give it yourself. I backed up another step, my heel striking a scattered tie. I nearly fell. The imitation officer's head tilted further, as if irritated by my clumsiness. Then it spoke again in my voice, perfectly steady. Say it. My stomach turned. Say what? I managed, voice trembling now. The chamber went silent. And in that silence, the tunnel seemed to lean in so close I could feel it pressing against my teeth. The voice answered. Slow. Patient. Your name. I froze. Of course it wanted that. Names are anchors. Names are proof. Names are what you answer to, what you sign on reports, what dispatch uses when they need you to respond. A name is the cleanest way to connect a voice to a person. A name is identity turned into sound. Not real. Real. Not real. My mouth went dry. I shook my head slightly, refusing. The imitation officer's mouth opened then, not wide, just enough, and from inside, it came my own voice, very soft. My name is. It paused, like it couldn't quite finish without me, like it needed me to confirm it. The signal light brightened to a steady glow that made my eyes sting. The tunnel hummed. The chamber vibrated. It was waiting. It was patient. It had time. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth hurt. I didn't say my name. I didn't speak at all. I just stood there trembling, holding the dead radio that whispered, staring at the imitation officer's face. Then, something changed. The imitation officer's head turned slightly, like it was listening to something I couldn't hear. And from behind me, from the tunnel I'd come through, came a faint sound. A distant train horn. Long. Low. Echoing. Impossible. Because the rails here were broken. The track ended in rubble. There was no line for a train to run on. But the horn sounded anyway, and the chamber responded to it. The hum grew deeper. The signal light flickered for the first time, and I felt the floor beneath my boots vibrate like steel under the weight of an approaching engine. Not real. Real. Not real. The imitation officer's mouth closed. Its eyes glinted wetly, and the voice that came from everywhere whispered, almost tender, now. Stay on the line. The vibration grew stronger. The sound of something heavy approaching from the darkness behind me grew louder, a grinding rumble that felt like it came from inside the rock itself. I stood there, trapped between the imitation officer in front of me and the impossible train sound behind me. And I realized with sick clarity that the tunnel wasn't leading me anywhere. It was scheduling me. It was fitting me into its own timetable. And in that timetable, I had already arrived. I didn't know what scared me more. The fact that the voice knew I'd found it, or the way it said now stay, like it was reminding me of an agreement I didn't remember making. My body went rigid. My shoulders pressed into the cold tunnel wall behind me. The alcove with my badge sat to my left like a doorway that wasn't supposed to be there. Everything inside it looked arranged with care. Not tossed, not forgotten. Placed. A hard hat set upright as if it could still be worn. Gloves paired together, fingers aligned. A safety vest folded so the reflective strips faced outward like eyes that would catch light no matter where you stood. And my badge, sitting in the center as if it mattered more than the rest. Not real. Real. Not real. I kept whispering it in my head like a prayer that didn't believe in itself. I backed away from the alcove slowly, my flashlight beam fixed on it even though I didn't want to see it anymore. The tunnel around me felt tighter. The air heavier. My breath came out short and sharp, and every time I exhaled it felt like the space listened. When my boot scuffed the ballast, the sound rang out too clean, too bright, like it didn't belong in the damp hush. Then it rang again. A second scuff. Not mine. Behind me. I turned my head just enough to see the darkness beyond my flashlight's reach. Nothing. But I could feel it there. Close enough that I didn't want to straighten my posture, because I didn't want to lean into whatever might be hovering at my back. The abandoned radio in my left hand crackled faintly, even though its screen remained dark. Like it was awake in a way machines shouldn't be. My own radio, clipped to my vest, stayed silent. Dead. Cut off. The tunnel had decided which voice I was allowed to hear. I forced my legs to move again. Forward, past the alcove, deeper into the tunnel. Because the exit behind me felt like a lie now. It had already shifted once. It could shift again, and I couldn't trust the tunnel to keep an opening where I wanted it. I walked, slow at first, then faster as the pressure in my chest grew, as if staying still too long would let the tunnel settle around me like wet concrete. The hum returned, low and deep, vibrating in the rails and the walls. It wasn't loud. It was constant. A reminder that the place was working. Not real. Real. Not real. I tried to focus on practical things. Occupational things. The habits that had kept me sane for years. Count your steps. Check your footing. Watch the wall for signage. Look for a maintenance marker. Anything that turns fear into a procedure. But the tunnel didn't offer procedure. It offered contradiction. The concrete walls began to show old stains that looked like smoke. Metal brackets jutted out at odd intervals. Some rusted clean through. There were sections where the lining cracked, revealing rock beneath, rough and damp and threaded with roots like veins. I passed a faded sign bolted to the wall. The letters were barely readable in my flashlight beam. It looked like a standard warning placard, the kind that tells you about clearance, or ventilation, or emergency exits. But someone had scratched over it with something sharp, carving words into the metal. Stay on the line. My stomach tightened. It wasn't written neatly. It was etched into the surface in frantic strokes, like whoever wrote it had needed it to be permanent. Like they'd needed the tunnel to see it. I stepped away from the sign, my boots slipping slightly on wet stone. I could feel sweat cooling under my uniform despite the cold. My flashlight beam flickered once. Just a stutter. And in that stutter, I saw the tunnel ahead was different. The walls seemed closer together, the ceiling lower. And for a split second, far ahead, I saw something moving. Not a person. Not an animal. Something tall and narrow sliding along the edge of my light. Like a shadow that knew how to stay just outside illumination. My heart punched hard in my chest. I kept walking. Because stopping felt worse. Because the moment you stop in a place like this, you give it time to decide what to do with you. Not real. Real. Not real. The water dripping changed rhythm. It had been steady before. Slow taps like a clock. Now it sped up. Drip, 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 drip. Almost like footsteps. Almost like someone hurrying to keep pace. I forced myself not to look up. I forced myself not to imagine what might be hanging from the ceiling that could make water fall like that. Then the tunnel began to curve. It shouldn't have. On every map I'd seen, the tunnel ran straight through the hill, a simple line from one side to the other. But my flashlight beam now cut along a gentle bend, the right-hand wall arcing away, the left-hand wall pressing closer, a curve that didn't belong in the paper version of this place. My mouth went dry again. I slowed, trying to orient myself, trying to decide if I'd somehow wandered into a different section. But there was no junction. No branch, only the tunnel continuing, subtly bending like a spine. Not real. Real. Not real. I reached the curve and rounded it. And that's when I saw the lights. Not bright. Not modern. A series of small, dim points along the wall ahead, like distant candles. My breath hitched. For one insane moment, I thought I'd found a maintenance crew. A work team setting up lanterns. People. Relief surged so hard it almost made me laugh. Then I realized what the lights were. Old emergency reflectors. The kind that used to be installed decades ago, meant to guide a worker out in case of blackout. They weren't electric lights. They didn't glow on their own. They only shone when something shone on them. And they were shining now. But my flashlight beam wasn't reaching them. The angle was wrong. Something else was illuminating them. Something moving toward me from deeper in the tunnel. I went cold all over. I raised my flashlight higher, forcing the beam down the curve. The reflectors flared brighter, one after another, in sequence, like a line of eyes opening. Closer. 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 And then the sound came, a scraping drag along stone, soft but steady, like something being pulled behind someone who walked calmly. The same kind of sound the drag marks had suggested outside. The same smooth purpose. My legs locked. I stood there staring down the bend as the reflectors lit up one by one, each flare revealing nothing but damp concrete and darkness behind it. But the darkness was changing, thickening, collecting. Not real. Real. Not real. The abandoned radio in my hand crackled again. I didn't press any buttons. I didn't touch anything. Still, a voice whispered through it, faint and intimate, like someone speaking close to my ear. My voice, but it wasn't saying words. It was copying my breathing. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Perfectly timed. My chest tightened. I forced my breath to slow. The radio matched it. I tried to hold my breath. The radio held it too. And in that moment I felt something sink in with sick clarity. It wasn't just copying my voice. It was copying the pattern of me. It was learning what I would do before I did it. I stepped backward. The reflectors down the curve stopped flaring. The scraping sound paused, like it noticed my hesitation, like it was adjusting. Then the voice from the air, not from the radio, came again. Low. Calm. A voice that sounded more certain now, less careful, like it had practiced enough. It said, "Don't leave." The words didn't feel like a threat. They felt like a correction, like leaving wasn't an option the tunnel recognized. I backed up another step. My boot struck something on the ground. Not stone. Metal. I looked down, and my flashlight beam caught it. A rail spike, bent. Not like it had been pulled by a machine. Bent like someone had twisted it with a hand. It lay beside the track, pointing toward the curve ahead like a finger. I stared at it, and the longer I stared, the more the tunnel seemed to press its meaning into my mind. This way. Forward. Stay. Not real. Real. Not real. My vision tunneled. I realized I was trembling. Not from cold, from the sensation that the tunnel had turned from a place into a presence. It didn't feel like stone and concrete anymore. It felt like a decision being made around me. Then the scraping sound started again. Faster now. Not a run. A quickened drag. The reflectors flared again. Closer. Lighting in sequence like something approaching with steady confidence. My body moved before my mind could argue. I ran, but not back. Forward. Around the curve. Toward whatever was making the reflectors shine. Toward the deeper dark. Because the tunnel behind me already felt occupied, and the tunnel ahead, somehow, felt like the only space left that wasn't yet filled. My boots slapped wet concrete. My flashlight beam bounced wildly. The reflectors flashed past me on the wall like a stuttering film reel. And as I ran, I heard something behind me that made my stomach drop through the floor of my body. Footsteps. Not echo. Not dripping water pretending to be footsteps. Real footsteps. Heavy boots striking stone. Matching my pace. Gaining. Not real. Real. Not real. I ran until my lungs burned and my throat tasted like blood from dry air and panic. And then the tunnel opened. Not into daylight. Not into safety. It opened into a space that shouldn't exist at all. A wide circular chamber where the rails ended abruptly in broken metal and rubble, as if the track had been torn out of the ground. The ceiling rose high above, disappearing into darkness. The walls were raw rock here, not lined concrete, and the air smelled older, like deep earth. In the center of the chamber, illuminated faintly by my flashlight, stood something that made my legs stop on their own. A signal post, old style, rusty, still upright. And its light was on. A dim, steady glow, not red, not green, but something in between, like a color that couldn't decide what it wanted to be. The kind of light you don't see on the railroad. The kind of light that means the rules have changed. The boots behind me stopped. The chamber went silent. And from somewhere in the dark above, that voice spoke again. Not through radio, not through air, but through the space itself. "Good," it said softly. "You're here." The signal light in the center of the chamber didn't flicker. It didn't pulse or stutter like a dying bulb. It held steady, calm. confident, as if the tunnel had always meant for it to be there, waiting like a marker on a map only certain people could see. That light didn't belong to any system I knew. Not the railroads. Not the maintenance logs. Not dispatch. A wrong color, suspended between red and green, like permission that didn't want to call itself permission. I stood at the edge of the chamber breathing hard, flashlight beam shaking across raw stone and broken rails. My boots felt glued to the ground. Behind me, the tunnel I'd run through had gone quiet. Too quiet. The footsteps that had chased me had stopped at the threshold, as if whatever wore them understood this chamber was different territory. Not real. Real. Not real. I whispered it under my breath, barely audible. The abandoned radio in my hand crackled faintly in response, the softest imitation of agreement. The voice came again, low and sure. "Good," it said. "You're here." It didn't say who it was. It didn't need to. The tunnel spoke like it had ownership. I forced myself to step forward, one cautious boot at a time, eyes fixed on the signal post. The broken rails around it looked torn, twisted upward like ribs pulled out of a chest. Old wooden ties lay scattered, half buried in damp earth, and between them were more objects. At first they looked like debris. Then my flashlight caught their shapes and my stomach sank. A hard hat with a cracked brim, a set of keys on a ring, the kind maintenance workers carry, a flashlight with its lens smashed, a glove, still shaped like a hand, belonged inside. Pieces of people's working lives, left behind in the dirt as if the tunnel had collected them and set them down gently. Not thrown away. Kept. I moved closer, compelled by the same instinct that had made me pick up the radio. The need to understand. The need to label. The need to turn chaos into evidence. But the closer I got, the more the chamber felt like a display. Not a storage space. A room of trophies. Not real. Real. Not real. My flashlight beam slid across the base of the signal post, and there, carved into the metal in shallow lines, were words. Not spray paint. Not marker. Scratched. Repeated so many times they overlapped, some letters worn smooth, some freshly. "Stay on the line." I stared at it until my eyes burned. The phrase wasn't a warning anymore. It was a command. A ritual. A rule the tunnel wanted obeyed. The hum that had followed me through the tunnel wasn't as strong in here, but it still existed. A low vibration beneath everything. It felt like being inside a machine that hadn't started moving yet, but could at any moment. I shifted my weight. Gravel crunched softly. And the radio in my hand whispered, unprompted, "Stay." I jerked my gaze to it. The screen was still dark. No power. But it spoke anyway. I tightened my grip until the plastic creaked. Then, above me, from the dark ceiling, something dripped. Not water. It sounded thicker, a heavier drop hitting stone. My flashlight snapped upward, beam searching the height of the chamber. The ceiling disappeared into shadow. I couldn't see where the drop had come from. I couldn't see anything except rock and darkness, but I could feel a presence up there, vast and patient. Like the tunnel had lifted itself into the ceiling and was looking down. Not real. Real, not real. I swallowed hard and forced my eyes back to ground level. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen at first. A shape beyond the signal post. A darker patch against the rock wall opposite me. At first, I thought it was another tunnel opening. But it didn't look like a tunnel mouth. It looked narrower, like a slit, like a seam in stone. And in front of that seam, standing perfectly still, was the figure in the uniform again. The one I'd seen earlier, the imitation officer. Except now, with the signal light behind it, I could see it more clearly. The uniform wasn't worn properly. The shirt didn't sit right on its shoulders, as if the body underneath wasn't built for it. The sleeves were a fraction too long. The collar looked stiff and flat like paper. The badge on its chest reflected my flashlight beam, but when it flashed, it looked blank. No name, no number, a badge without identity. Its head tilted slowly, like it was curious again. Like it was waiting for me to speak first. I wanted to run. Every part of me screamed to run. But the tunnel behind me felt sealed by something I couldn't see. Not a physical wall. A certainty. The kind that settles into your muscles when you realize there is nowhere to go that isn't already accounted for. The voice came again. Closer now. Not through radio or air. It felt like it came from inside my ribs. You stayed. The words weren't praise. They were confirmation. Like a box being checked, I forced myself to speak, because silence felt like surrender. What is this? My voice came out rough, thin, small in the chamber. Who are you? The imitation officer did not answer, but my own words returned, not as echo, as repetition. The abandoned radio whispered, "Who are you?" The signal light in the center of the chamber seemed to brighten slightly at the same time, as if it enjoyed the sound of the question. I realized then what the tunnel wanted. It wanted conversation, not because it cared, because conversation created connection. A line, a channel, a thread. It wanted me on it. Not real, not real. I took a step backward. The imitation officer took a step forward. And for the first time, the movement and the sound matched. Boots struck stone, real boots, real weight. My stomach dropped through my body. It had improved. It had learned enough to make the sound fit the motion. The figure raised its radio mic, the one clipped wrong to its collar. It pressed the button slowly, deliberately, as if it had learned how. And my own voice came out of its mouth, calm and steady, as if reading from a script. Unit 2, it said. Report status. I stood there shaking, flashlight beam locked on its face. The face was closer now. The smooth, waxy skin, the mouth too wide but closed. The eyes like wet stone reflecting faint light. It was wearing my voice like a uniform. Not real. Real. Not real. Something in my mind buckled. Because the voice wasn't just similar. It wasn't just an imitation. It sounded like me on a clear radio channel, the way I sounded when I was calm and trained and in control. The version of me that existed at work. The version that knew procedure and responded automatically. I opened my mouth to answer. And for a second, I didn't know what I was about to say. I didn't know if my words would come from me, or from whatever had already learned them. I swallowed hard and forced myself to say nothing. Silence. The chamber seemed to stiffen, like a room going tense. The imitation officer tilted its head again. Then the voice shifted. Not mine. The careful, guiding voice. The voice that had first told me stay on the line. It came from everywhere at once. You're trained to answer. My skin crawled. The voice continued, gentle as instruction. You answer the call. I felt my throat tighten. I thought of every night I'd sat with my radio clipped to my vest, listening to dispatch, listening to calls come in, responding without hesitation. Answer. Confirm. Proceed. I'd built my whole working identity on being reachable, on staying connected, on staying on the line. Not real. Real. Not real. The signal light brightened again slightly, like it was listening too. The imitation officer took another step closer. Its boots sounded perfect now. It stopped a few feet away, close enough that my flashlight beam fully lit its chest and shoulders. The uniform fabric looked wrong up close, like it wasn't cloth at all but something that only resembled cloth. It smelled faintly of damp earth. It lifted its hand slowly, palm open, reaching toward me. Not grabbing, offering, like it wanted me to place something in its hand. The abandoned radio in my grip suddenly crackled louder, the static sharpening into a whisper. Give. My heart slammed in my chest. Give it the radio. Give it the badge. Give it the words. Give it yourself. I backed up another step, my heel striking a scattered tie. I nearly fell. The imitation officer's head tilted further, as if irritated by my clumsiness. Then it spoke again in my voice, perfectly steady. Say it. My stomach turned. Say what? I managed, voice trembling now. The chamber went silent. And in that silence, the tunnel seemed to lean in so close I could feel it pressing against my teeth. The voice answered. Slow. Patient. Your name. I froze. Of course it wanted that. Names are anchors. Names are proof. Names are what you answer to, what you sign on reports, what dispatch uses when they need you to respond. A name is the cleanest way to connect a voice to a person. A name is identity turned into sound, not real. Real, not real. My mouth went dry. I shook my head slightly, refusing. The imitation officer's mouth opened then, not wide, just enough, and from inside, it came my own voice, very soft. My name is. It paused, like it couldn't quite finish without me, like it needed me to confirm it. The signal light brightened to a steady glow that made my eyes sting. The tunnel hummed. The chamber vibrated. It was waiting. It was patient. It had time. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth hurt. I didn't say my name. I didn't speak at all. I just stood there trembling, holding the dead radio that whispered, staring at the imitation officer's face. Then, something changed. The imitation officer's head turned slightly, like it was listening to something I couldn't hear, and from behind me, from the tunnel I'd come through, came a faint sound, a distant train horn, long, low, echoing. Impossible, because the rails here were broken. The track ended in rubble. There was no line for a train to run on, but the horn sounded anyway, and the chamber responded to it. The hum grew deeper. The signal light flickered for the first time, and I felt the floor beneath my boots vibrate like steel under the weight of an approaching engine. Not real. Real. Not real. The imitation officer's mouth closed. Its eyes glinted wetly, and the voice that came from everywhere whispered, almost tender, now. Stay on the line. The vibration grew stronger. The sound of something heavy approaching from the darkness behind me grew louder, a grinding rumble that felt like it came from inside the rock itself. I stood there, trapped between the imitation officer in front of me and the impossible train sound behind me. And I realized with sick clarity that the tunnel wasn't leading me anywhere. It was scheduling me. It was fitting me into its own timetable. And in that timetable, I had already arrived. The rumble didn't come from the tunnel behind me like a train should. It came from the stone itself. It came from the floor under my boots, from the walls pressing inward, from the air vibrating like a throat clearing before speech. The sound wasn't loud at first. It was the kind of deep pressure you feel more than you hear, the kind that makes your lungs tighten and your teeth buzz. Then it grew. Steady. Certain, approaching. And the signal light in the center of the chamber flickered again, that wrong in-between color stuttering like it couldn't decide whether to grant passage or forbid it. Not real. Real. Not real. I whispered it this time, out loud. The moment the words left my mouth, the abandoned radio in my hand crackled and whispered them back. Softer. Not real. Real. Not real. I stared down at it, my fingers clamped around plastic that should have been dead. The screen was still dark. No power. No battery indicator. No channel light. But it was awake. I looked up at the imitation officer. It stood motionless, only a few feet away. The uniform still didn't sit right on its shoulders. and the badge on its chest still reflected light without showing anything meaningful. Its mouth was closed now, as if it didn't need to speak anymore. It had already heard enough. The voice from everywhere, the calm one that felt threaded into the rock, whispered again. "Your name." The words landed like a hand on my spine. I wanted to shout. I wanted to scream anything, to break the quiet and force the chamber to become a place again instead of a presence. But my throat wouldn't do it. My body understood something my mind didn't want to accept. Names stick. Names travel. Names make a line. I kept my mouth shut. The rumble behind me grew heavier, like an enormous weight rolling forward through a tunnel that didn't exist. The vibration in the floor sharpened until the rubble at the end of the broken rails trembled, tiny stones jittering like insects. My flashlight beam danced across the rock wall as my hands shook. Then the imitation officer did something small. It breathed, a slow inhale that lifted its chest too evenly, too perfectly, like it had practiced breathing from watching me. And when it exhaled, the abandoned radio exhaled too, a soft hiss of static that sounded almost satisfied. Not real. Real. Not real. The signal light brightened again. The chamber seemed to narrow in my vision, like the edges of the world were closing. I backed up a half step without meaning to, my heel scraping gravel. The imitation officer stepped forward immediately, matching me. For the first time, I heard the faintest sound of fabric shifting on its body. A small detail. A finished detail. It had learned. It was close enough now that the light from the signal post faintly washed over the lower half of its face. The skin looked smooth and tight, stretched across bone in a way that made it hard to judge age. It didn't look dead. It didn't look alive. It looked unfinished. It lifted its hand again, palm open. Waiting. I stared at that open hand and understood what it wanted without having to be told. The radio. The badge. The roll. The part of me that answered. Behind me, the rumble surged, and with it came something else. A rhythm. Metal on metal. A slow, grinding clack that sounded like train wheels passing over a joint in track. But there was no track. The sound should have been impossible, and yet it was coming closer, filling the chamber with mechanical certainty. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Somewhere inside me, the oldest part of my brain insisted that if I looked back, I would see the thing that made the sound. And once you see a thing like that, you don't get to go back to not knowing. Not real. Real. Not real. I squeezed my eyes shut for a second, then opened them again. The imitation officer was still there, still waiting, still patient, like it knew time belonged to it. My chest hurt, my lungs felt too tight for air. I realized, with a sudden clarity so sharp it almost calmed me, that this chamber wasn't trying to kill me. It was trying to replace me. It didn't need my body to stop working. It needed my identity to start working for it. My name, my voice, my trained response. The part of me that never hesitated when called. The rumble behind me reached a peak, shaking the chamber hard enough that dust fell from the ceiling in thin drifts. The signal light flickered rapidly now, stuttering between that wrong color and darkness. And then, beneath the rumble, I heard something else. A voice. Not the guiding voice. Not the imitation officer. Dispatch. Clear, clipped, familiar. Coming through the radio clipped to my vest. My real radio. My chest tightened so hard it felt like pain. Unit 2, dispatch said. Calm and routine, like this was any other night. Status check. The sound was a lifeline. For a heartbeat I wanted to answer so badly it made my hands ache. That's what training does. It makes response automatic. It makes connection feel like oxygen. My thumb twitched toward the push-to-talk button. The imitation officer's head tilted slightly, as if it could hear dispatch too. The open palm remained steady, waiting for the exchange. Dispatch repeated, a little firmer. Unit 2. Status. Not real. Real. Not real. My mouth opened. The word yes rose in my throat like a reflex. I could feel it, the shape of it, the familiar beginning of compliance. But before sound could leave my mouth, the abandoned radio in my hand whispered first. In my voice. Perfectly timed. Unit 2. Status. It copied dispatch's tone. It copied the professionalism. It copied the calm. My jaw snapped shut. My whole body shook because the abandoned radio didn't just repeat. It answered. It was answering in my place. Dispatch spoke again, and this time there was a faint edge in the voice, the smallest thread of concern. Unit 2. Respond. The signal light flickered and went steady again. The rumble behind me slowed, like something settling into position, like a train easing to a stop. And in the quiet that followed, the imitation officer stepped closer, until it was close enough that my flashlight beam threw its shadow across my boots. It leaned in just slightly. Its mouth opened, and my voice came out. Soft, intimate, the way you speak to someone who can't escape. Stay on the line. My stomach dropped. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I couldn't. Because the sound behind me shifted again, and now it wasn't only rumble. It was breath. A massive inhale that seemed to come from the darkness beyond my flashlight's reach. The chamber itself inhaled, and as it did, the signal light dimmed, as if the air had been pulled toward something unseen. The imitation officer's open hand lifted higher, palm still up. And I realized the simplest truth. The tunnel didn't need my consent. It only needed my participation. One response, one word, one name, one moment of staying connected. Not real. Real. Not real. I held the abandoned radio tighter, because it was the only object in my hand that felt like proof something was happening at all. And then, impossibly, the abandoned radio warmed. Not from battery. From inside. Like a living thing held against my palm. It crackled, and the whisper came again. Not a word this time. A sound, a soft imitation of a man clearing his throat before speaking. Like it was preparing. Like it was about to say my name with or without me. I stepped backward without meaning to. My heel struck the broken rail. Metal rang out, sharp and clean. The chamber answered with silence so sudden it felt like being struck. The signal light went out. Darkness swallowed the center of the room. My flashlight beam wavered wildly, and in that wavering light I saw the imitation officer's face change. Not morph, not transform. Refine. Like a sketch being inked over. The mouth looked more like mine now, the jawline closer, the eyes less blank, more reflective. It was learning what I looked like from how I reacted, from my fear, from my insistence on staying human. Not real. Real. Not real. Dispatch called one more time, distant now, like the voice was coming through a long hallway. Unit 2? I raised my radio. I pressed the button. I tried to speak. Nothing came out of my mouth. Not even breath. It was like the tunnel had gently taken hold of my voice and was holding it in reserve. The abandoned radio in my hand whispered into the dark. Yes. My voice. Perfect. And somewhere behind me, something heavy shifted, satisfied, as if a train door had just closed. The imitation officer's open hand lowered. It wasn't asking anymore. It had been answered. I don't remember leaving the chamber. I don't remember the run back. I don't remember seeing the tunnel entrance again. I only remember light. Suddenly. Harsh and flat. Like the world had restarted without warning. I was lying on gravel outside, face turned toward the tracks. Cold air burning my lungs. My flashlight lay nearby, still on, beam pointed into the trees. My patrol car was there, idling, headlights cutting through the woods exactly the way they had when I arrived. Everything looked normal. That was the worst part. Because I was covered in damp stone dust. My boots were soaked with black mud that didn't smell like earth. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't unclench them at first. And the abandoned radio was gone. I sat up too fast, panic surging. I checked my belt, my vest, the ground around me. Nothing. Like it had never existed. Not real, not real. My radio clipped to my vest crackled. Dispatch. Back to routine. Unit 2, confirm you're clear. I stared at the radio for a long time before I answered, because my mouth didn't feel like it belonged to me anymore. I pressed the button carefully, like touching something hot. This is Unit 2, I said, voice trembling. I'm clear. The words sounded like mine, but underneath them, faint as breath, there was another voice layered so close you could mistake it for static. It whispered in perfect sync. Clear. I drove back to the yard without thinking, parked, clocked out, went home, slept in my uniform because the idea of taking it off felt wrong, like my skin might not be underneath it. In the morning, I checked the call logs. There was no signal irregularity, no dispatch record, no report, no reason I'd been out there. The system said my unit never left the yard. Not real. Real, not real. That's why I can't file this. That's why this is only a recording. Because the tunnel outside Scranton doesn't want paperwork. It wants voices. It wants answers. It wants a line. And the worst part is, I think it still has one. Because every so often, late at night, when my apartment is quiet and the world feels far away, my phone will light up. No number. No caller ID. Just a blank screen buzzing softly like it's trying to breathe. And when I answer, I don't hear silence. I hear my own voice, patient and close, like someone standing in a doorway behind me. Stay on the line. Not real. Real. Not real. I'm posting this now while my hands still feel like mine. If you've listened all the way to the end, do me a favor. Subscribe. Not because you owe me anything, because if you ever see this video disappear, if you ever come back and find it missing, I need you to remember it existed. And in the comments, tell me where you're watching from. I need to know how far away you are. Because the last time my phone rang, the voice on the other end didn't say stay on the line. It said something new. It said, "Where are you?"